Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. Look, if you're a manufacturer or frankly anyone tied into a global supply chain right now, you already know the pressure is absolutely on. The European Union, Japan, South Korea, plus all those massive global brands are constantly tightening the screws on their requirements for recycled content and sustainable traceability. It's not just a nice to have anymore, it's literally the baseline for doing business. So today we're talking about to really put the sheer scale and authority of this into perspective, think about this number, over 15,800. That's how many valid ISCC certificates are out there worldwide right this second. So yeah, this isn't some niche experimental framework. The International Sustainability and Carbon Certification System is an absolute powerhouse. It's a multi-stakeholder initiative that's widely recognized as the gold standard for environmental, economic, and social sustainability on a global scale. When the biggest brands in the world look for verifiable proof that a supply chain is truly sustainable, this is the system they trust. Okay, so what actually is ISCC PLUS? Well, officially, it's a voluntary, globally applicable certification scheme. Its whole reason for being is to verify the sustainability of alternative feedstocks. Think things like bio-based, recycled, and circular materials, and it does this across your entire supply chain. We're talking from the exact point of waste origin, like a local restaurant producing used cooking oil, all the way to the final brand owner placing that product on a store shelf. If you're an export-driven manufacturer looking to secure contracts with major international brands, ISCC Plus is basically your required ticket for entry. Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. 1. Global passport to sustainability. 2. The 4 feedstock categories. 3. Tracking the supply chain. 4. Demystifying mass balance. 5. Crucial updates and guardrails. And 6. Your roadmap to certification. We're going to make this whole thing incredibly easy to digest. All right, let's jump straight into part 1, Global Passport to Sustainability, and how it unlocks those international markets. So why are global brands suddenly demanding this highly specific proof from their suppliers? In a word, accountability. With all the new regulations and massive consumer pressure, a brand simply can't just claim their plastic packaging is green anymore. They have to prove it through independent verification. Now, there is a massive misconception in the industry that we've got to clear up right off the bat, and that's confusing ISCC EU with ISCC PLUS. Here's the deal. ISCC EU is a mandatory framework specifically designed for European fuel markets so they comply with the Renewable Energy Directive. ISCC Plus, on the other hand, operates totally outside that specific EU legal framework. It is a voluntary global standard. But because it covers broader markets like plastics, chemicals, packaging, and textiles, it's effectively become the de facto mandatory standard if you want to sell into the supply chains of top global corporations. They demand it, which practically makes it essential for B2B trade. Moving on to part 2, the 4 feedstock categories, where we categorize the actual inputs. If you're going for this certification, you absolutely have to know what types of alternative materials actually qualify under the ISCC Plus system. The ecosystem basically breaks down into 4 main slices. First up, you have circular materials. This includes stuff derived from mechanical or chemical recycling of fossil-based waste, like mixed plastic waste or old tires. Next, we've got biocircular materials. These come from biological waste, such as used cooking oil or agricultural residues. Then there are straight-up biomaterials, which are sustainably cultivated agricultural crops or forest biomass. And finally, renewable energy-derived materials. These are power-to-X products, basically converting wind or solar energy into green hydrogen or eFuels. If your input material falls into one of these 4 slices, you're on the right track. Next up, part 3, tracking the supply chain, focusing on chain of custody methods. Now, the golden rule of the entire ISSC system is that every single link in the supply chain must be certified. No gaps allowed. Why? Entirely to prevent double counting. We need to be absolutely sure that 1 ton of sustainable material doesn't magically turn into 2 tons of sustainable claims on the consumer end. To track all this, ISCC Plus offers 3 chain of custody methods. Physical segregation is exactly what it sounds like. Your sustainable materials are kept completely physically separate from standard materials at all times. It gives you absolute transparency, which is great for agriculture, but it's incredibly expensive to run parallel production lines. Next is controlled blending, where you mix materials at a fixed, known ratio to make consistent claims. And then there is mass balance. Here, materials are physically mixed together, but kept entirely separated in your bookkeeping. This is the absolute best and sometimes literally the only practical choice for complex chemical, petrochemical, and plastic manufacturing where physical separation is just technically impossible. Think of mass balance like a bank account. You don't track the exact physical dollar bill you deposited, you just meticulously track the value. Which brings us right to part 4, demystifying mass balance. This is really the technical heart of the system. For a lot of folks, just the phrase mass balance sounds super intimidating. In fact, it's honestly the #1 cause of audit failures and nonconformities. But how does it actually work? Well, I want you to stop thinking about complex chemistry for a second and start thinking about accounting. Mass balance is not some scientific magic trick. It's simply a strict, highly reliable bookkeeping system for your supply chain. Since you're physically mixing sustainable and non-sustainable raw materials together in a reactor or vat, the resulting product completely loses its distinct physical sustainable traits. So the only way to track that sustainability is through a meticulous ledger. A ledger that flawlessly balances the certified inputs with the certified outputs over a specific period, usually a 3-month window. The math that makes this whole ledger actually work relies on one absolutely crucial concept: the conversion factor. Basically, this is a metric based on your actual real-world production data that accounts for processing losses, because in any chemical or manufacturing process, you're going to have yield loss, right? Some material burns off as CO2, some turns into waste sludge. The conversion factor calculates exactly what those losses are. And here is the golden rule: you absolutely cannot claim more sustainable output than your certified input minus those processing losses. It completely prevents a company from taking 100 tons of sustainable input, losing 20 tons in manufacturing, and still trying to turn around and sell 100 tons of sustainable product. The math has to balance perfectly. Let's slide into part 5, crucial updates and guardrails, and how we protect the system's integrity. Because this mass balance system completely relies on bookkeeping, ISCC has put up some incredibly strict rules to protect the integrity of the system and prevent greenwashing. Trying to navigate this alone? Yeah, it comes with some massive audit pitfalls. For instance, if you use estimated data instead of real production data for your conversion factor, you will fail immediately, no question. Allocating sustainability credits beyond the actual physical output of a product is another major violation. But the absolute biggest one? Lacking proof of chemical connectivity. You literally have to prove that the atoms or molecules of your certified input can, theoretically and practically, end up in your final product. You can't just buy a credit for a completely unrelated material and slap that label on your product. On top of that, incorrectly transferring credits between sites, which has crazy strict rules regarding corporate ownership and geography, by the way, or just using outdated ISCC documents will easily trigger nonconformities. And speaking of rules and documents, you really have to keep pace with the regulatory timeline because it is moving incredibly fast. Look at this. By 2025, the EU is mandating that PET bottles have to contain 25% recycled material. That is going to be a massive demand shock for certified recycled plastics. In late 2025, the brand new Mass Balance Guidance 1.0 and Chain of Custody version 1.1 are being released. By May 2026, a new regenerative agriculture add-on launches. And then by January 2027, the mandatory enforcement of these new chain of custody rules officially kicks in. So there's a very real ticking clock here. If you want to secure these lucrative global contracts, you need to act immediately to get your systems compliant before those deadlines hit and you find yourself locked out of the market. All right, final section, part 6, your roadmap to certification. Let's go over the actionable steps. So how do you actually pull this off without falling into all those audit traps we just talked about? Well, it takes a highly structured approach. Honestly, it's usually best handled by teaming up with specialized consultants like ISC Global, who just know the system inside and out. Step 1 is your gap analysis and scope definition, basically figuring out exactly where you stand right now and what method, like mass balance, actually fits your facility. Step 2 is the heavy lifting, documentation and bookkeeping setup. This is where you establish your conversion factors and set up your traceability ledgers using the very latest system documents. Step 3 is internal training. Your staff actually needs to know how to run this day to day, which is why consultants often provide bilingual training for diverse workforces. And finally, step 4, you run a pre-audit to catch any glaring mistakes, followed by the official certification audit by a recognized certification body. Look, having a consulting partner hold your hand through this roadmap is by far the best way to avoid incredibly costly, time-consuming mistakes. Which leaves us with one really vital question to chew on. Is your supply chain actually ready for 2026? Because with those EU mandates kicking in and the biggest global brands drawing a hard line in the sand, the era of unverified sustainability claims is officially over. It is time to seriously evaluate your readiness. Seek out expert guidance to get your chain of custody set up and make absolutely sure you have your passport ready for the global circular economy. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I highly encourage you to start assessing your facilities today.